Welcome to another episode of Systematic Geekology. This is a space where we seek to create and cultivate healthy conversations between those things we geek out on and the philosophical and theological questions that often arise out of our fandoms. Like, what does it mean to be human? What makes a hero? What makes a villain? How do the stories and narratives we geek out on shape how we live in the world? We are your priest to the geeks. We aren't all ordained, but we see ourselves as mediators at the intersection of geek culture and going deeper in our faith. We don't always have to agree, but we do respect each other, and we see everyone as a beloved child of God. Everyone geeks out on something, so come geek out with us and enjoy the show.
You're listening to an Anazao Ministries podcast.
What can we learn from the never-ending feud between Dracula and the Belmonts? We're going to be asking that question and plenty more on today's episode of Systematic Geekology. We are the Priest to the Geeks. I'm your host, Christian Ashley, here joined by Matthew Winter. How you doing, Matthew?
I'm really good.
I'm glad to hear that, man. Yeah, listeners, you don't know this. We are recording way early in the morning, and for one of us being on Pacific time, way earlier than what I would consider reasonable. So I'm very grateful for Matthew to. It's one of the only times we could get this done. So there's that. We're going to be covering Castlevania today, both the video games and the anime, which is interesting because I have not played the games outside of, using a couple of them to test out in Smash Brothers. That'd be about it for how far I've gotten to the series. So I'm very interested to see what Matthew's learned from his time playing the games as well, how they go with the show. But before we get in there, Matthew, what have you been geeking out on?
Let's see. So I started watching the new Digimon Adventures, the reboot.
Okay.
Like it so far. I think it's definitely got a more serious tone. And yeah, I'm really liking it so far.
So not quite as much goofy 90s fun.
Exactly. And then my wife just finished the Orville.
Okay.
And I watched probably about 60% of it. And then the Phoenix Wright anime.
Yeah, I've seen that
ridiculous.
One. Perfect. Well, Kevin and I did an episode not too long ago on our top movies of 2024 so far, and one of the ones he had mentioned I had not seen was Late Night with the Devil, which is basically kind of a pseudo found footage of a broadcast from the 70s where a late night host on his last legs is like doing whatever it takes to get the ratings, and he has this girl come on who's said to be possessed by a demon, and it goes through the wackiness in that situation, wackiness being terrible, horrible things, and it was really good. Cannot recommend it enough. So that's it for that. Matthew, if you had to explain Castlevania to the good people from the video game side of things, how would you do that?
Okay, so Castlevania, the name, is literally just the name for Dracula's castle, which is a living chaos entity that reappears either every 100 years or when it is summoned by some kind of cult or wizard or whatever early. Not always with Dracula in it. It's actually more about the castle than it is about Dracula. So there is the Belmont clan, which they are a clan of part vampire, part human vampire killers that go way back to, I think, 12 something in the oldest game is where it starts. All the way up to about 2035 is the most futuristic game. And there's this continued struggle back and forth every 100 years or so or sooner between the Belmont clan and the monsters of Castlevania. So every game, you're a Belmont or a relative for the most part. There are a few exceptions, which I'll get into later. But, yep. So you're just banishing the evil back away to the Chaos Realm to restore peace and light to mankind.
Okay. What's the most recent game that's released? Do you know?
So the newest games are a completely different timeline. So I don't even know much about those. So because
so they're at that point in the franchise where they need to branch off because there's just too much that's already been done. Okay.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Fair enough. They got to make their money.
Yeah, I could say. Well, yeah, and it's more than that too. The main guy that took over, that was doing the games for a while or whatever, there was a thing, and he's not around to make the games anymore. It was essentially around like the PS2 era when we started getting 3D games. Konami wanted to move into 3D, and he continued to want to make kind of 2D open world platformers, which is what Castlevania is known for, and so they parted ways. And so the 3D games are a completely different timeline than the 2D games.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I do know from a little bit of osmosis, the idea is it's a type of game called a Metroidvania, that being, Metroid, Samus and all that, but also the Castlevania part. So
Yep.
Can you describe that kind of game real quick to people?
Sure. So a Metroidvania is the original platformers, obviously we can think of Mario. So you're going along, you're going along on the thing, but once you move to the next screen, you can't go back. It's a forward only kind of game. So what a Metroidvania does is it is like within 2D platformer side scroll, it's open world. So there may be a locked door or some kind of item you can't get to behind a wall or whatever in this section, and there's some key or item or something you get later in the game, and you are actually able to go back to another area. And so what it did that was groundbreaking is they were the first games to have not only forward movement, but backward movement.
Okay. All right. So, with all that in mind, what was your introduction to the games? And I'll give my introduction to the show and a little bit of the games too.
Yeah. I think true for most people my age would be the PlayStation classic Castlevania Symphony of the Night. So, in that game, you are Alucard.
Okay.
Yeah. So in that game, you are Alucard, and Richter is cursed by the wizard Shaft, and you have to defeat Shaft to break the curse. And when you do that, the true Castlevania appears, and then you have to go through a second castle and beat your dad.
Mm-hmm. Ah, okay.
And it was, in 96 or 7, I think that game came out. I think I played it a little bit later because I had the Game of the Year edition. So that was the first one. For me, it had terrible, awful, cheesy 90s voice acting, which is just absolutely iconic. So it was one of the first games to have like voiceover dialogue in the late 90s, and it's just, that game is part of me.
Okay.
Even my little quote here for anyone who has played the game is straight from the game. So,
What is it? What is man? A miserable pile of secrets, I think is the
yes,
quote.
what is man? A miserable pile of secrets. Yes.
That's good. Yeah. Like I said earlier, I have never played the games. So I do think my introduction to the series proper would have been in a Super Smash Brothers game. I can't remember when. It's Simon and Richter that are both.
Yeah, Simon and Richter are both playable characters in Ultimate.
Okay. So they hadn't showed up before then, right?
Were they in what was the last one?
Oh goodness gracious. Brawl, Melee, Ultimate. I'm definitely forgetting one, and it's probably the one we're talking about.
Was there one for the Wii U? Was there one in between?
That is an excellent question. So let me look it up right now so that we are not. Yeah. Oh, no, come on.
Because Brawl was the GameCube, right? And then Melee was for the Wii.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then I didn't have a Wii U, so I don't know.
Oh, is it just called? Oh, it's Super Smash Brothers 4, I think.
Weird.
That was for the Wii U. Yeah, no, that's why I couldn't remember the name. Yeah, sure. So
that's lame.
Yeah, I do remember them being in there.
Okay, maybe they were.
I think, or maybe just one of them was. Don't trust my memory. But as far as like the show itself, I remember hearing a lot of hype around it before it was released. It was one of those, hey, Netflix, we're really into making anime, even though it's not really an anime from the Western perspective. That being like it's actually made in Japan. For Japanese perspective, all animation is anime. So we can get that debate on another day. We're just going to call it the anime for right now.
Yep. The animated series.
Yes. And it's like, I was a little hesitant too, because I was like, yeah, I'll check it out. But I saw, Warren Ellis is the one writing it. It's like, he and I are not really aligned as it is for most of the comics that he's written. He's a very edgy and very vehement about anti-religious feelings that he has. And sometimes
that tracks.
Yeah. As you can see in this actual series, like I like his Thunderbolts run, but most of his other stuff, I'm like, yeah, I just don't care for it. It's not for me. So when the series came up, I was like, I don't know. But then it was just 4 episodes long. It's like, well, I can watch 4 episodes in like a little over an hour. Did that. I was like, wow, this is pretty dang good. There's some things I really don't like, but ultimately, this is fun.
Yeah, no, it's definitely gritty. It's I mean, as far as anime goes, at least from my perspective at the time when I watched it, pretty graphic. Like if that's not your thing, be warned.
Yeah. Well, moving away from there to just focus on the video games for a little bit. Obviously, I won't be able to answer these questions, but I do have an expert on hand who is able to do that and was willing to even look at the outline I had for it. So, Matthew, which of these games are your favorite and why?
Symphony of the Night, always, just because it, nostalgia, but it is, it is also considered the pinnacle of the genre, which is interesting because it is one of the handful of games where you're not a Belmont, and yet it is the one that kind of redefined the genre.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a handful of games after it that really just copy it.
Okay.
So then that one, and then for the Game Boy Advance, there was the Aria of Sorrow, which it takes place in the future. It's 2035. A Belmont of a previous generation. They had trapped the castle in the moon's shadow. However you do that, I don't know. You know,
simple
it's
science.
Weird video. It's weird video game lore. But anyway, so the protagonist in that is his name is Soma, and he's actually a reincarnation of Dracula.
Mm.
So he's going through basically to defeat the castle so he can stay him and then not get taken over by Dracula.
Fascinating. So
yeah, and so but in both of these games, in neither one of these do you play a Belmont. So they both have a level system, and you can find new weapons, swords, armor, things like that. So there's that element. And then in the Aria of Sorrow game, you're also collecting monster souls. And when you collect their souls, you get various abilities. So there's all kinds of magic and spells and things you can use depending on which souls you equip. So it's funner than just running through the castle with a whip.
Okay. Now, what timeline is Symphony of the Night in?
Symphony of the Night is in the main.
Oh, I'm sorry. Year is what I meant to say.
1796, I believe.
Okay. And there are some games that take place in the French Revolution as well, correct?
That's in that. That's right in that.
Okay. Because I know that's where the Nocturne kind of takes inspiration from.
Yeah. So there was a Japan-only game that we didn't get, Rondo of Blood, where Richter was the main character. And then that.
Okay.
Symphony of the Night takes place essentially right after that. So
okay.
Richter defeats Castlevania, but then the Dark Wizard Shaft curses Richter, and Richter essentially cursed Richter brings the castle back, or rather the shadow of a castle back, and then Alucard has to go in and free Richter from the spell. If you do it correctly and you defeat Shaft and not Richter, then the real Castlevania appears in the sky and you get the good ending. If you kill Richter instead of Shaft, you get the bad ending. And you only get to play through one castle.
All right. So from all these games that you played, is there anyone that kind of stands out as one of your like favorite characters, and why so?
Favorite characters? I'm trying to think. I mean, you have to go with Alucard.
Okay.
You know, half vampire, son of Dracula, but he refuses to prey on mankind. And he stands for good to fight against his father, who would kill us all if he had his way.
Is it the same that it is in the show where his wife is murdered, and that's what turns him against humanity, or is Dracula just like this evil being? Okay.
Yep. Yeah. There's a lot. How to put it? The show doesn't change tons as far as the lore. Obviously, it just greatly expands it for the sake of, rather than being a loose video game timeline that's kind of just, dates and, here's some stuff that happened in between. They have to fill in all the stuff.
Okay. Excellent. So what is it really about Alucard, other than like his crusade against his dad, do you like find appealing about him?
He's very much unlike myself in the sense that he's very stoic and very serious and very driven, and I am none of those things. So there's a little bit of that, being attracted to what you're not.
Yeah. A little bit of wish fulfillment, seeing that in the world somewhere.
Yeah.
No, I get it. That makes perfect sense. Okay. So obviously Dracula is like our main villain for a lot of these, if not all. I obviously haven't played them all, but like, do you think a series just grows stale when it keeps recycling the same villain over and over again, or are there just new and interesting ways that you end up encountering Dracula?
Well, the castle's different every game, because it is, It is a living chaos entity that morphs and changes, and every time it appears, it is different. So there's that aspect. And you never go in knowing like where stuff is or like how the castle's going to unfold. So there's that aspect. But as I said, he's not always in the game. There are some of the games where Dracula is not present. Because Castlevania is the castle and is actually the, what you're fighting, and Dracula just happens to be the end boss. So there are some staples. So Dracula, death is almost always towards the end of the game as an end boss. And then there's usually at least one other like lower vampire character, like Olrox, or there's another one in a couple of the other games. But that keeps it interesting too. Even though there are some staple bosses, the monsters and things like that tends to change. You don't know who the bosses are going to be, or is there magic in a given game? Or do you just have your whip or whatever? I think they've done pretty well if you like the format of what a Metroidvania is. I think they did, pretty well to make every game unique and different. But I can absolutely see how, if you don't have just an absolute love affair with the format itself, how you could get to that, oh, this again phase.
Gotcha. Okay.
Hello, friends. If you enjoy Systematic Geekology, a great way to support us and to keep us moving forward into the future is to be a patron on our Patreon network. If you're a Patreon, then you get live access to our YouTube exclusives like Comic Book Ketchup and Manga Mustard, Drinks with Tejas, and also some extra content there with our companion series to go along with our annual theme. If you're a patron, you get exclusive merch like t-shirts and handbags and mugs. There's also a bonus extra question that has extra content. In each episode, we go deeper into our faith and the questions that we're wrestling with, but we also do this extra question to jump in and share about, and patrons get to hear how we answer that question. There's discounts on our store. You get access to any future online D&D campaigns. You can easily access all of our Patreon content through our Spotify page where it says exclusive content for subscribers. That could be you folks. And all that being said, you get the satisfaction that you help us keep the lights on and keep us moving forward with our software, our marketing, our equipment, staying current in the podcast game. We love Systematic Geekology. We hope you do too. Support us moving forward. Thank you for all that you are. We know there's a lot of great choices and content out there, and you choose to listen to Systematic Geekology. Thanks, folks. We love you. Peace.
So you would say it's being handled a bit better, like something like, say, Darth Vader in every Star Wars film takes on a kind of a different role as a villain. Not say he's still Darth Vader, but the Darth Vader of Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi is not the same one we encounter in A New Hope. Like there are different things that he does. It's something that keeps him fresh.
Right. The castle is dynamic, and like the bosses, other than death, are pretty dynamic. So I think just those two things, that they rearrange the castle map every game, just like every Zelda game has a different Hyrule, and yet it's all still Hyrule.
Yeah. Okay. That makes perfect sense. So one of the things you did mention is that the game does have very different monsters sometimes, from many different religions and mythologies, not only like your typical universal horror, like there's vampires and werewolves and Frankenstein's monsters and stuff like that, as I understand it. But like
in the first game, they weren't really quite sure what they were doing with it yet. And it's just, it's full of just all the classic So Frankenstein is a boss, and the Mummy is a boss.
Okay.
And but they quickly abandoned that by the time they got to the third game.
Okay.
Dracula's Curse. They kind of realized what they were doing, and so you have Dracula and you have death in that game, and then just a bunch of other like zombies and other undead type creatures.
Okay.
Giant bats, and less like horror monster of the week kind of.
Yeah. So how do you think the games implement those different monsters from these very different backgrounds? Like, for instance, I found out, hey, Mothman's apparently an enemy there. There's also the Tsuchinoko of Japanese mythology. Like, how do you think those are implemented?
So if you don't know what those things are, they're just another boss. You're just going through, you're playing through the game, you're like, what is that? Okay, how do I beat this thing? But
Fair.
As games got more elaborate and things like that, and there began to be dialogue, or at least like in-game stuff about the bosses, and it's one of those things where it's half accurate on purpose. Like, there will be the thing will have its own distinct like Castlevania lore around what the thing is.
Mm-hmm.
So they're essentially borrowing Mothman or borrowing Quetzalcoatl or whatever it is that they're putting in, and it has lore that resembles its real world lore, but there's definitely it's not the same thing. It's definitely a Castlevania version of that thing, where they've given its own lore and its own backstory that resembles real life, but they haven't just pulled it straight out. They've world built around the borrowed creature.
So they more take inspiration from mythology and folklore and the like. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, which I actually like better, rather than trying to pull something in and just co-opt it for the game, and or getting it wrong, which would be even worse, or disrespectful if that happens to be your particular system or mythos or whatever. For them to put it in the game and then you play the game and just be like, that is not how that works. Rather than that, they borrow the thing and then they lore craft around it their own version of what the thing is.
Okay. So this is just based on, my next question is based off of my cursory research done on Wikipedia, the fandom wiki, and TV tropes. But apparently at one point in time, Dracula claims that he will always return so long as evil remains in the world. So what are our thoughts on this as a premise?
Oh man, I don't know how to answer that without getting into eschatology.
I mean,
but
it's our show, man. We can do whatever the heck we want.
Because initially there was just a curse, like I said, that causes the castle to return every 100 years, and until they finally seal it away in Aria of Sorrow, and Soma goes into the Chaos realm and defeats Chaos so that the castle never returns. And that's kind of the end of the story, that the source of all of it was finally defeated, because essentially being partly Dracula himself, he was able to go into the Chaos realm and fight Chaos and stop the cycle. But it's definitely one of those ideas where, from a Christian perspective, I'm going to say, at least until Christ returns, whenever that is, however that works.
Yes. Well said.
There will be evil. So really, I think as deep and philosophical as the line seems to be, it's really just a line that allows them to keep making games because the world will always be evil.
I concur. Even without having played the games, it's an old trope for a reason. A villain is always able to come back as long as there's darkness within men's hearts or something like that, and it works. Yeah. Because hey, we live in a sin-sick, shriveled up world that is not in the state it was supposed to be in. So these aberrations that exist, the evil and sin that exists, sure, as a premise, that always being something that could bring an evil being like Dracula back, yeah, I'm 100% behind it. Like I see it throughout history. If you're a student of history, like the names change, but the evil remains in some of the motivations of the people who commit the evil act. So why would that be any different in this case? Yeah, sure, it's more supernatural in that sense, but it just makes a lot of sense to me as an idea. So I'm behind it.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I'll move on from there. It's time to actually get into what I can talk a little more about, and that being the anime done on Netflix. Were you able to catch up to Nocturne?
So I saw Nocturne, and then I watched. I was going through Castlevania last night and looking at what I'd watched, and in my mind, I had remembered only seeing the first 2 seasons, but I had actually seen the first 3.
Okay.
So up through Camilla's Rise and all of that stuff. I just didn't get to finish it through the 4th season. So I believe COVID happened and there was a much longer wait for season 4. But the time season 4 came out, I actually forgot that I was watching it and never finished it.
Fair enough. Yeah, I watched it a little later too. One of those things that just kind of slipped by me. It's like, oh yeah, there was a season 4, wasn't there? Then I caught that, and I actually just finished Nocturne last night because we were talking about doing this episode. So I never saw that. Well, time to watch 8 episodes as quickly as possible.
It's a slow burn for sure. Because they've gone through the whole first season and they're not even into any game lore yet at all, so it's going to be interesting to see how it develops.
So the game starts with like the endless night.
The what now?
The endless night that they kind of end up causing.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah. So again,
spoilers, by the way.
Rondo of Blood we didn't get in the U.S.
Oh, that's right.
So I actually. Which was the game where Richter was the protagonist. So I don't really know. I don't know if they're going to do that or if they're going to do Symphony of the Night, since Alucard does show up right at the end.
Yes.
I'm hoping, but we'll see what happens with Nocturne. The characters are definitely more bland than in the first show. But I like that they got Juiced, or what was it, Juice Day, in there, who he was from one of the Game Boy games. And he helped Richter unlock his magic.
Oh yeah, his grandfather? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So that was cool for me. I'm like, hey, I played that game.
Oh, good. Well, we've mentioned it earlier before, and how especially the anime handles religion. Like, what are your thoughts on how that is conducted in the show?
Good and bad, because the fact of the matter is that at that point in history, there were absolutely. Other than, not with the hordes of demons and Dracula and all of that stuff, that aside, it's unfortunately not that far off with, with witch burning and just legalistic penance and being punished by the church. And really, I mean, this is the era of the Holy Roman Empire. So even if your kingdom had a king or an emperor or a prime minister of some kind, they were still under the Holy Roman Emperor.
Yes.
Who was appointed by the Pope. So it was really the church that was in charge of everything. So in that, you did have a lot of aristocrats and richer families essentially buying their way into the priesthood. So there were absolutely corrupt priests who, really had no business going anywhere near a church. They had bought their power and their influence.
Yes.
So, and fun fact for those that don't know, that is why Catholic priests aren't supposed to marry. Because what would happen then is that their children, their families would inherit the church land and all the stuff that had been given to them by the church. And then so you had all this stuff that was supposed to be owned by the church, but it was now family property.
And I couldn't have that.
So, right. So
yeah,
that's how that came about.
Yeah, especially at this point in time in history. This is 1470s or thereabouts, I think, if I remember my years correctly. So we are 40, 50 years away from the Protestant Reformation. This is one of the reasons that happened in the first place was because of the corruption within the Catholic Church. And that's not to say that not every Catholic priest was some corrupt individual who only cared about money or only cared about advancing themselves or just putting themselves in a high position. There were plenty of Catholic priests out there who were doing their job and, bringing people to faith and having them explore the Bible and all that. But there's a reason there was a Reformation. So,
yeah, and medieval dogma was just pretty awful in general. Yeah.
So I'm not opposed to there being, a negatively portrayed religious figure in the show. It's just like when almost every single one is evil in some way, shape, or form, and it just happened again in Nocturne. It's like, and this is even. And that's not even written by Ellis. That, from what I understand, because he has some allegations against him that are better left unsaid. So it's annoying, but it's like the nuance of it. And I will say for Ellis, there is one scene, and I think season 1, where Trevor's plan needs holy water or something like that for it to work, and there is one priest who can legitimately offer it. So he is an actual, shepherd of God in that scene. But that's an outlier versus everyone is like mind-bendingly evil, just like pretty much just might as well be stroking a cat and, announcing their plans for world domination is what it feels like. So it gets really annoying to me when that happens. It's like, once again, I'm not opposed to there being a religious figure who is not using their powers for good, who is abusing the system, because, hey, I am a student of history. I have seen it happen in every single denomination that has ever existed. Yep. And it happens outside of Christianity as well.
Yeah.
So like that in and of itself doesn't need to be something that never happens. Well, I'd have to be an idiot to say that. But it's when you make every single one feel like that's all the church is about. That's all the church is against learning. That's why they murdered Dracula's wife, is because she was trying to use science to help people, and we can't have that. We can't have. And part of that being of the time, I will give them that women learning wasn't exactly something they held in high esteem. But it just goes like Saturday morning cartoon villainy to the point where it's like this is a caricature versus an actual believable thing that could happen that I really get upset about as a viewer. What's your take?
There was a little bit of a journey with this character. There was a little bit in the middle there where you thought there was some mixed motivations, and that he was, how do I put it, doing a like a lot like that. And there's a minute there where you think he's more of like a lawful evil. like he's doing the wrong thing for the right reason.
Yeah.
But then he completely flips, and he's just a psycho evil guy by the end of it.
Yeah. And I
Go
ahead.
like that. I liked the arc of the character, that he wasn't just from the get just this cat petting, mustache twirling. There was some exploration into his motivations.
Yeah, and that's not to say that every single character is written that way, because as you just pointed out, there is some nuance to him. It's not enough, in my opinion, but there's still some. And Nocturne, they did some there too, of someone who had lost his way, and he kind of has his own moment where he is basically reenacting the Abraham sacrificing Isaac scene. And he's like, well, why didn't God give me the ram? Where's the ram? That's an interesting thing to do, but it's also baked around the idea that his best plan is to hold power because he's afraid of the French Revolution that's about to happen, and he doesn't want the church to lose its influence, which was one of the reasons the French Revolution happened in the first place, was because the church was as corrupt as it was. So either work within the system and make it better, or be part of the problem. He became part of the problem.
Yep.
So there's that. Anything else you want to add to the religious side of things for Castlevania?
I will say, kind of like what you said, where there's just like there's the one priest who's actually like a real priest.
Yeah.
I do. And, it's not just this series, it's most things in general, right? Christianity is always Catholicism, and it is always this just corrupted, worst version of it at the height, or, at the pre-Renaissance, late medieval kind of, let's just pick the worst version of the thing and use that brush and just paint with it.
It's like, the Catholic Church has never changed. There was never a Vatican II or anything where there was a lot of reform being done. They're always the same evil people they've been in the past, from a Hollywood perspective. Or when you need a dash of Christianity thrown in, you just throw in a Catholic priest, especially if there's an exorcism or something involved, because they're the only ones who do it, right? Like, no,
it's easy to just grab at that, and yeah.
So yeah. Oh, you could talk about that all day, but we just end up talking in circles.
Lazy. I will say that. I think it's become a lazy trope at this point, and I would love to see someone be interesting to see someone who's either non-religious or anti-religious as their lore crafting and world building, to actually do a little bit of research and have a little bit of nuance in their, representation of Christianity. But,
slightly off topic. Mike Flanagan, what he does, he's an atheist, but in most of his portrayals of Christianity, fairly well handled. Like, you can see there's some respect there. So I would recommend checking out some of his work. There's still some things and kind of go, oh, really? You said that? But at the end of the day, I do think he has an appreciation without wanting to, join the team, as it were.
Right.
Okay. So we brought it up a little bit earlier as well. One of the conflicts of this series is between Dracula and his son Alucard. And like, hey, Dracula is trying to avenge, well, maybe you could say he started off avenging, then ends up for revenge for the death of his wife, who is a human, creating this Dhampir, the hybrid between vampire and human, Alucard. And the two of them having clashing ideals. He wants to be more like his mother, and hoping for peace between vampires and humans. Dracula has lost all sense of that part of himself after her death. Like, how does this play out in the show, and like, what do we find interesting about it?
Well, I've always liked their dynamic, which is why he's my favorite Castlevania character, and why Symphony of the Night is my favorite game. Is I just, where Alucard is carrying out his mother's final mandate, her last wishes. Don't hate them. They don't know what they're doing. and he's just trying to live out his mom's final wishes, whereas his dad, is absolutely bent on just destroying mankind, us the evil, vile creatures that took his beloved. And I think it's interesting because they're both motivated by the same event.
Mhm.
One motivated for good and one motivated for evil. So I think there's a lot to say about that, just about someone's point of view and perspective, because it's the same event is the catalyst for both of them. So I like that aspect where there's a singular event. One loses any sense of good they had left and just become, pure evil. And the other one is that just the idea in general to me of Dhampir characters is always interesting because they have to be at war with their vampiric urges and desires for blood and power and all of that. Yeah. With their more moral human, do I live as a vampire or do I aid humanity?
Yes. Yeah, I'm glad you used the word catalyst earlier. I was going to describe it that kind of same way. It's like from the singular event, it creates a chain reaction to where Dracula goes one way, Alucard goes another way, and there's still love between them. It's like, you are my son, but you're in the way, and if you're in the way, I'm gonna deny our love so that I can get what I want done. But at the same time, Alucard doesn't want his father to die. He's already lost his mother, but he also knows letting Dracula live would be immensely detrimental to the world, to say it shortly. And that conflict between those two halves of himself, being that Dhampir character, is like, Blade is one of my favorite characters of all time, and that seeing that for him in his movies and his comics, and then seeing a character like Alucard as well, like, well, do I drink blood? How do I get sustenance? Do I interact with humanity? Do I just set myself apart from them? As we see in the show, he tries to set himself apart. Even when people do show up, I think in a very cruel way, in a very Ellis way, they end up causing him problems. Those two vampire hunters, what were their names? Like Taka and something, that just end up betraying him.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's a vampire and the Dracula business and all that. It's like, that was just for the sake of drama than actually serving a story, in my opinion. But that's its own thing. So, but to actually see him wrestle with those two things, that's very interesting to see as people who are struggling daily, now that we've come to faith, versus me, the new man that's been created, versus the old man who seeks the things that I used to do. And yet I have to actively fight that instinct every day because I am not in my perfected heavenly body at this point in time. And I'm hoping that's a far time away, but that's not up to me to decide. Like, I identify with that struggle because sometimes I win. Other times I lose horribly. And it's like, why even bother if I'm just going to keep repeating this cycle? So to see someone else struggling over that, succeeding, but also still struggling, I like that a lot.
Yeah. And it really, he just epitomizes in a very dramatic way that absolute, that yin and yang battle within ourselves of, acknowledging that the evil exists, but fighting so the light can win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I will say, I was very happy to see him at the end of this latest season. It's like, oh yeah, they kind of need him right now.
Yeah. Just shows up at the end. It was dramatic. It was good.
All right. Well, speaking as a whole, do you have a favorite season and why? And my image will give away mine.
Haven't seen, as I revealed earlier, I didn't finish it. I haven't seen the 4th season. I'm trying to think of the storyline of the show and break it down, and remember what happens when, and if I have. I liked the beginning. after the setup. So probably season
Okay.
2. Although season 3 is really good too. The whole show is fantastic, really.
I'd agree with that.
So it's very quality. I think season 2 for me, just as the Castlevania fanboy I am, was kind of the height for me, because we get the Alucard Dracula, we get the fight, and I wasn't sure where they were going to go after that, and then the story in season 3 is very good too. But for me, as a fan of all things Castlevania, I think season 2 was definitely the peak for me, because you get the fight with Dracula.
And it was a pretty dang good one too. Well animated.
Yeah.
Yeah. My answer is season 4, but to go real quick, season 1 is solid setup. Like you get just enough so you know who these people are, you know what they're about, you know why Dracula is on his rampage, you know why the Belmonts do what they do, why Sypha does what she does, why Alucard is struggling with what he's struggling. It's a solid season. Was 4 episodes long. And then season 4 is like the culmination of everything. Is it perfect? No. But you get like everything that's been built up across the show. You see Carmilla and her vampire coven of sorts, and them trying to vie for power. You've got, Hector and Isaac are both doing their own things, trying to figure out where their place is in the world now that Dracula is gone. While Trevor and Sypha are trying to become this couple, and like, what does that mean now? What is our life? Yeah, sure, we do love each other, but like, how do we create a life in a world like this? And Alucard once again struggling with who he is, and like, is Dracula going to come back? What do we do? And you've got even people like Saint Germain just in the background being this mysterious, enigmatic figures. Like, what is his motivation that comes to a head here as death does appear in this season as well? Yeah, it's got some pretty good fights. It's got some pretty good bits of characterization. I do love season 4 the most. And I'm hoping to see more from Nocturne when the new season does come out. And I agree with you. They're a little bland at this point in time, but I have hope for better. Okay. Well, is there anything else you want to discuss about the show or the games before we head off to our wrap up?
No. It's one of those things where, for whatever reason, just vampires and Dracula and all that stuff have always been cool, and they're always interesting. And so to have an entire game series around that is just, it's neat.
Yeah. Fair enough. All right, guys, what do you think? We'd love to hear what you have to say on this series. If you say, hey, why didn't you focus on this part of the games? Or why didn't you think about this from the anime? It's like, hey, how are we going to know if you don't tell us? And as well,
there's a lot of content.
We're going to be doing our special bonus question as normal. For our Patreon and Captivate listeners, just throw a little money our way that way. If you want to hear us answer the question, is the magic used in this series evil? Because it does pop up multiple times over, and we'll be having that discussion later on. So as far as rating and reviewing, this is an entire franchise. We're not going to go systematically game by game or season by season. Like, how do you feel overall, your score for the franchise?
There are definitely some of the games in there at a certain point, as we discussed earlier, that just become derivative. None of the games are terrible, except for maybe Castlevania 2. But that was a platform thing. I think that game was limited just by being an NES game. There was only so much they could do with it. The premise was cool, but it just executed in a way based on the limitations of the system. But overall, Castlevania as a whole, for me, as in almost anything that's like a serious take on Dracula, so not some of the goofy stuff that's out there, but rate very high. The show's 7 or 8 for me. Nocturne so far is probably only a 5. Just the characters are bland, and they definitely need to bring in some stronger characterizations, I think, to get up to that 7 or 8 for me. Like, characters for me are always important in any franchise.
Okay.
You can have the best story in the world, but the characters are the avatar by which we experience that world. And if your character is bland, then the experience is bland. At least for me, that's how I feel.
Oh.
So they need to bring up the characterization. Some Maria wasn't bad. I liked Maria, but everyone else was kind of not there.
No, I'll heartily agree with that assessment. Like, you live and die by your characters. Yeah, plot is great. So I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 overall, and that's it for that. So, Matthew, do you have any recommendations for the audience?
Recommendations for the audience. What was I think? I had one when I read the outline, and now I don't. It's like 6 a.m. But
okay, well, I'm going to go ahead, as that lovely fire system is behind me. Just The Green Mile. Excellent movie, excellent story. Stephen King has absolutely nothing to do with what we talked about today, but I mean, you can't go wrong with watching that movie. So with all that in mind, guys, thank you for listening. Sorry for the noise in the background. Hopefully that's edited out and I'm just talking nonsense. That's what I would prefer things to be. So please get a chance to leave a 5-star review on your podcasting platform of choice. As well, head over our way on Facebook, Discord, what have you, to suggest episode topic ideas. We're about to do one fairly soon on the God of War series and Assassin's Creed and everything involved with that. If also, as well, since we have over 100 subscribers on YouTube, you have unlocked a special Q&A session with all the hosts, all those able to attend. If you want to send questions our way, you can do so at systematicgeekology@gmail.com, or on Facebook, a Priest of the Geeks page, or on Discord. We have a special episode discussion page there for you to do that. So, yeah, thank you for all you do. We need to shout out some patrons real quick. Thank you for all that you do. Ethan Overcash, Austin Nance, and Amber Riley. But remember, we all are chosen people, a geekdom of priests.
Hi, my name is TJ. I'm here to tell you about the Systematic Geekology shop. That's where we post all of our merch. It is hosted on Creator Spring, and we have a ton of really cool merch, mostly clothing. We have hats, extra soft t-shirts, sweaters, hoodies, and more. Our hosts wear them all the time. It's actually super comfy. We have glassware, mugs, which everybody loves a good mug. Fill out your cupboard. Get rid of some old ones, which is the part that I never do. That's why I have too many cups. We have cloth bags, posters, and it's really stuff. We like to put our icons on there. We like to put quotes, things we've come up with, and it's cool. It's a cool way, and a lot of it is pretty subtle too, to show support for one of your favorite shows. And my personal favorite is actually our SG dad cap, which I haven't been reluctant to buy it because now I have to wear hats at work, and then I get tired of wearing hats. But it's really cool. It's really understated. It is our logo right here, and then it says Systematic Geekology on the back. It's great. It's a really good hat. We have a few of them floating around. Check it out. And if we could all just rock the SG dad cap in public, I think that'd be pretty sweet.
Be sure to check out other Anazao Ministry Podcast AMP Network shows. You can see the whole network in a single feed if you're on Spotify, or you could go to Apple Podcasts and find the Anazao Ministries Network podcast, the AMP Network. Yeah, there's just a network on Apple. You can follow the whole thing. You'll get shows like The Homily, where Pastor Will goes through his homily messages. It's literally just Pastor Will's sermons, guys. It's great. You also get access to the Whole Church podcast, where TJ and myself interview leaders from across different denominations and backgrounds to work towards a more full church unity. You can see My Seminary Life, where Brandon Knight discusses his experiences at seminary and then discusses seminary topics, so anyone can have access to knowledge available to seminary students. You also can see Let Nothing Move You over there, where Christian Ashley goes through the Bible in a Bible study type fashion and explains the whole biblical narrative. I also have a show on there, The Dummy for Theology, where we discuss various theological topics in an attempt to show every side of the discussions, leaving you with more questions than answers. There's also The Bible After Hours, where the foul-mouthed preacher goes through the Bible from a more progressive view to challenge the status quo of the modern church. Finally, you can hear The Clydes, where Taylor and Elizabeth Clyde go through weekly discussions in a devotional conversational style method to help us all get closer to one another and to God.